Trico.
The Last Guardian is a miracle video game, surviving at least 8 years of development hell during which Team ICO would dissolve when director Fumito Ueda and other staff left Sony following the decision to move the project from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4, though they finished work on the game by contract under their new studio GenDesign, which persists to this day. The Last Guardian was polarizing upon release in 2016 and has remained a contentious talking point among Team ICO fans. Today I want to explore why. Deep in the ruins of an ancient castle within a valley known as the Nest, a young boy covered in strange markings awakens alongside a giant dog, cat, bird, rat, griffin, ferret creature called Trico, lying wounded and chained. The boy frees and earns the trust of the wild beast by feeding it mysterious glowing barrels. They soon find a mirror shield within a crypt, which can emit lightning from Trico's tail. Together they traverse the precarious ruins in hopes of escape, fending off supernatural armored soldiers while Trico gradually restores its broken horns and wings. However, their friendship comes into question when they wander into these mind control rooms where Trico is manipulated into eating the child, prompting a flashback. Turns out, Trico had kidnapped him from his village one night to bring him to the Nest, but was struck by lightning and crashed down where it was chained by the soldiers. Back to the present, our unlikely duo encounter a hostile member of Trico's species, eventually cracking its armored headpiece, breaking it free from mind control. They finally arrive at the Nest's Sentinel Tower, discovering a powerful entity called the Master of the Valley, who summons dozens of Tricos to the tower, where they are seen regurgitating marked children into a strange contraption rewarding them with barrels to eat. Our Trico is viciously attacked by the Horde, ripping off its tail, which the boy uses to destroy the Master of the Valley, causing the tower to decay and the Horde to fall out of the sky. Although beaten to near death, Trico musters the strength to fly the child back to his village, where the residents begin to attack. With a weak voice, the boy issues one final command to his companion: to go away. Following the credits, the boy, now a grown man, rediscovers the old mirror shield, shining its rays toward the valley. In response, from the depths which our journey began, we see two pairs of eyes peering out of the darkness, presumably belonging to our and the other Trico whom we freed from the Master's control. The game is narrated by the older boy as he recounts his adventure, and these, along with the flashback, provide a more complete picture compared to the extreme ambiguity of Ueda's past titles. While I do find the storytelling equally powerful, the gameplay integration is considerably weaker. The boy seems surprised witnessing the second Trico and these glass talismans despite seeing them earlier.
See, I suffer from short-term memory loss.
A lot of moments pretend like immediate action is needed when in reality players have forever to figure things out. The other games had black bars to indicate cutscenes, but in Last Guardian, gameplay and in-engine cinematics bleed into each other, so I can't always tell when I should be prepared to do something and when I can enjoy the show. It seems to run out of original ideas for generating excitement, repeating dramatic situations and treating them all like significant milestones with filmic camera work, music, or slow-mo. Am I supposed to gasp every time our characters almost die from collapsing structures, or the third time Trico eats me? These only work so many times before growing stale, and knowing the boy ultimately survives thanks to his narration takes away a bit of suspense. Because so much of this depends on real-time physics and AI, it becomes extremely awkward when I fall to my death through no fault of my own. The Last Guardian takes lots of pages from its predecessors, from their general control schemes, to their artistic sensibilities, to overt references, strengthening the connections between all three. Like Shadow of the Colossus, The Last Guardian evokes wonderful feelings of smallness by contrasting the size of our characters with their environments. Like the Queen's Castle, the Nest is an awe-inspiring location with so much intricate architecture that appears both ancient and alien, accompanied by a convincing sense of space as I look into the distance to see landmarks of where I've been or will go, though I did notice some low-res textures here and there souring the view. I'd also be remiss not to mention how plain the text font is. Trico is by far the most impressive thing on display, with a staggering amount of detail selling its animality, which goes a long way in making this weird amalgamation of different biology as believable as possible. Ueda continues to delight in the animation department with countless context-sensitive motions characterizing our protagonists. However, it can be unintentionally funny when the boy bounces and ragdolls around, as if his body is made of rubbery noodles. The controller vibrations simulate his physical exertion, reinforcing the impact of on-screen activity. The premise shares strong similarities with ICO, as players utilize two characters' unique abilities to solve environmental puzzles, platform, and help each other in times of need. Trico is the key to our escape, so special consideration must be given to its well-being, whether that be removing the glass talismans it fears, feeding it when hungry, or clearing a path it can follow. The realistic level structure creates a seamless and logical flow of events. However, the pacing regularly suffers from janky mechanics related to our character's clumsiness and the objects around them. The boy handles detail-oriented tasks and gives orders to his feathery friend. Trico constantly looks to us for direction but also has a will of its own, sometimes interacting with things in unexpected ways, and as a result, progression alternates between us as we each take turns in the lead, which occasionally informs about Trico's capabilities. Naturally, this requires an enormous amount of trust, and in dealing with such a sluggish and complex AI, patience will be pushed to the limit, because in what is perhaps the game's most divisive aspect, Trico won't always respond to commands. According to Ueda, this was by design to enhance the believability that it's a free-thinking animal, allowing players to project their relationships with pets onto it, which has become a common defense for the game. However, I find this explanation wholly at best. The idea that everyone will know how to interpret and work with Trico through real-world experience is too assumptive, and even with that animal familiarity, Trico's behavior still leaves me guessing. My first instinct was to bombard it with commands in hopes of a quicker response, but apparently Trico is more receptive if it sees the boy issuing orders and has time to process them. Lowering its ears or whining may indicate that it's confused and needs another command or cannot do what it's being asked, whereas grunting or howling usually means it's ready to go somewhere. The changing eye color shows whether it's contented, distracted, or in a fit of rage. Based on the tutorial, I thought that petting was the best way to calm Trico down after battles, and while targeting certain body parts does have different effects and can even induce sleep under the right conditions, simply calling works just as well, which is all that matters for gameplay. Trico becomes less confident at fighting the longer it is exposed to talismans, pressuring disposal of them ASAP. Players issue orders using R1, whether by itself or in conjunction with the left stick and face buttons, loosely corresponding to the boy's actions. These can tell Trico to go in a direction, stop what it's doing, thus resetting the AI, jump, interact, or attack. While this combining of inputs is pretty smart, I only found the point and jump commands to be consistently useful. It's important to note that I discovered most of these things not by playing the game, but by doing research in preparation for this video. Sure, I could have been more observant and experimental, but that wouldn't justify how poorly explained this stuff is. Another problem with the Trico is meant to be realistic defense is that it becomes a convenient and lazy excuse whenever Trico is being stupid, which happens no matter how well it's been trained. The game can even softlock because of this, which I refuse to handwave. Regardless how much the designers intended players to struggle directing Trico, I can't imagine it was worth all the confusion. Control is imperative to video games as a medium, so having my inputs blatantly ignored is very counterintuitive. Yeah, Shadow of the Colossus had similar issues, but at least there, I could actually kill the thing that's giving me crap. Wait, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I'm okay with players having a conflicted relationship with this creature, but without an explicit reason for Trico's unresponsiveness, can anyone really be blamed for chopping it up to broken AI? Maybe it's preoccupied preening, licking its wounds, or fixated on something, or mad at me for treating it badly. Then I could at least forgive the disobedience and take steps to help it work with me again. 8 years later, I still see misinformation about Trico. Many claim it becomes more responsive if taken good care of, but from my own testing and after looking through countless videos and forums, the results varied too wildly to draw any definitive correlation between players' treatment of Trico and its obedience. Even speedrunners who dedicate themselves to this stuff admit they don't entirely understand the AI yet.
I don't really think that this was intended, but it is just kind of what happens. If he does kind of get caught up by one of those shields and he like freezes because he's panicked, that will make him less likely to do a good job in fights for the rest of the game. We're not really sure why.
So until someone pops the hood to look at the freaking code, this remains unclear, and the parts we do know don't always align with common presumptions nor lead to thematically appropriate gameplay. For an experience supposedly about building a bond, there aren't many cases players need to actively tend to Trico. In fact, they're allowed to be kind of neglectful and jerkish, wiping blood off its feathers, giving pets and appraisals, removing spears, barrel feeding. These are mechanics I'd expect more from, yet they're largely unnecessary, with just 11 of the 48 barrels being required, and only one point outside of the intro where the game checks if Trico has too many spears. Not removing them apparently hinders its mobility, though I couldn't tell much difference. Unlike Ico's Yorda, failing to protect our companion from danger or violence is scarcely punished. Then again, maybe these misunderstandings turned out in Last Guardian's favor, as people are still compelled to look after Trico despite the false gameplay incentive. I understand Ueda's rationale in theory, but I can't convince even myself that its implementation here, and lack thereof, makes the game better. Unfortunately, the questionable design choices are just beginning. The boy has only 2 walking speeds, a slow tiptoe and an overzealous sprint. The animations for tiptoeing and crouch walking suggest either could be used to sneak past enemies, but no, these really are just impractical movement options. The levels constantly flip between spacious outside areas and cramped ruins and caverns, with much of the terrain cluttered with tripping hazards to stumble over, so it really would have benefited from more nuanced and precise character movement. Crouching manually is worthless since the boy does this by himself when needed, and the ability to hang off ledges frequently doesn't work. He automatically grabs things in midair, so I often get snagged on Trico when trying to jump somewhere else, getting stuck in the joints as it twists and turns. While climbing, pressing X releases grip while triangle leaps along the surface. To jump off perpendicularly, the camera must be tilted sideways. Taking this together, simply getting on, off, or around Trico, particularly in dark or claustrophobic spaces, can be a disorienting pain in the butt, like a giant, ever-present obstacle. And to give an idea of the magnitude of this annoyance, I climbed Trico a total of 87 times throughout my latest run. Making grabbing automatic is understandable considering its utility, but this does lessen the tension and perilous platforming sections, especially because, with a few exceptions, the boy doesn't fall off ledges unless I'm dumb enough to jump. Equipment is once again mapped to the D-pad, but unlike Shadow of the Colossus, which had multiple weapons to switch between, Last Guardian just has the mirror, and the only reason I would unequip it would be to not interfere with other circle actions. I assumed this arrangement was to accommodate the eventual Fine Feather Painter, a post-game item which also utilizes the D-pad. But nope, I have to go into the menu to alternate between them. Why? Mapping the mirror and feather painter to the triggers would have lessened the overlapping actions on circle and removed the need to unequip or swap out anything. I haven't minded the unconventional control schemes of these games, but it makes less sense to follow a similar template here. The camera drifts all over the place, fades out briefly when stuck, and hardly ever stays where I put it, making little effort to keep the boy close, centered, or even in frame at times, forcing constant manual readjustments. It positions itself based on the location and fixates on points of interest when looking around. While conceptually promising, this mostly means wrestling for control over what I versus the game thinks is important to see. L1 looks at Trico, however strangely this is not shown in the controls. Every camera turn is gradual and wobbly with nauseating motion blur. Combine all of this with an ungodly amount of built-in input delay for everything outside of menus and this becomes one of the worst feeling games I've played. The incessant button prompts are not only unnecessary but also unhelpful on occasion, like this one telling me to shove Trico out when I really need to climb its head, or hang when there's no reason to do so. I eventually started ignoring them, which became a problem when it was finally teaching me something new, like placing a barrel on this box instead of throwing. Why there's no setting for disabling pop-ups is beyond me, however bizarrely, repeating the prompted action over and over will make most of them go away forever, but only for each new level element that involves those actions, and not at all for objects that are pushed or pulled. Hints are given via the boy's narration and contingent on a multitude of factors including where the camera is facing, where I'm standing, and what I'm doing or not doing, possibly taking up to an hour to trigger, as if anyone is going to stay for that long before either quitting or looking up the answer. Pressing in either stick will have the boy contemplate repeating the last narration, and sometimes makes the next relevant hint appear faster, though in my opinion this should have been immediate. There is no manual save system or health meter, and again, we don't game over by failing to protect our friend, so the worst that can happen is a lame fade to black restarting from the most recent automatic save point, which are very generous for most of the adventure, as if the game is saying, let's just pretend that didn't happen. Learning I'm impervious to damage from evil Tricos ruins the intensity of their sequences. Anything that doesn't kill is just sort of irksome. Mashing inputs to escape the master's influence gets pretty old, as does the temporary limping after injuring our foot. That said, I applaud this more creative approach to punishments instead of a basic health system. Not having to find stopping points like Ico's benches or the Shrine of Worship in Shadow makes me hesitant to put the game down because I don't want to interrupt my flow state, though I guess meditating for a reminder could potentially help with that. In a reverse scenario of Ico's combat, soldier encounters mainly entail staying out of harm's way while Trico gets all the fun. The boy can contribute by commanding Trico to swipe, even though that'll happen anyway, using the mirror to shrink and blast soldiers once available, or by pulling their helmets off when knocked over, which is pretty satisfying, but aside from dealing with glass talismans, none of these techniques are properly taught, and would demand ignoring the game's conditioning to keep my distance from soldiers. A total of 48 barrels can be obtained in each playthrough, unlocking 6 cosmetic items in New Game Plus at different amounts, capping at 96, meaning at least 2 complete runs. The Badge of Honor also gets more elaborate over the course of a few playthroughs. Some outfits reference past titles while the Fine Feather Painter colors Trico. I dislike challenges that mandate extra playtime or exist merely for cosmetics, so I could have done without these additional barrels since giving Trico more than necessary serves no gameplay purpose, and with the exceptions of the 10th, 36th, or 47th, the process of finding them is rarely clever. The only clue for their locations are up to 3 glowing butterflies per barrel, which increase the closer the boy is to them. A lot of climbable turf and pathways lead nowhere, and these pointless passages are never as obvious as the critical path, so I can't imagine they were intended to disorient players like a maze. So why have them? Where most video games revel in crafting a power fantasy, The Last Guardian embraces disempowerment. In both a literal and meta sense, the narrative and gameplay seem to be about relinquishing control. However, I would question if this is a good fit for an interactive medium whose main satisfaction arguably stems from taking charge of characters or situations. Does The Last Guardian stand tall alongside Fumito Ueda's other creative works? No, not to me. But it obviously comes from the same mind and positively belongs in the same discussion. Like Team Ico's previous ventures, The Last Guardian succeeds in telling a story that only this medium is capable of. Unfortunately, the few unforgettable moments are buried under hours of frustration, and this game isn't that long. Its greatest challenge is not puzzles, platforming, or combat, but patience to sit through shoddy design components, with less redeeming qualities than its older, more sensible siblings, lacking the comprehensiveness of Ico or the thrills of Shadow of the Colossus. The borrowed elements don't always work in this new context. I love climbing Colossi in Shadow, but I don't want to climb the same Colossus 87 times with no challenge, excitement, or differences. I love Yorda as a partner because she's obedient, unintrusive, easy to understand, and pleasant to interact with, which can't be said of Trico. From the AI, to the physics, to the camera, to the hint system, so much is over-engineered for little to no payoff. I've seen people go to extreme lengths to defend this thing. I'm happy to say my appreciation for Last Guardian has improved as I've come to grips with it, but that could be said of anything, and I'm not suddenly forgiving of every issue. There is no excuse for broken and unreliable AI, especially when progression depends on it. There is no excuse for unresponsive and unintuitive controls, bad or non-existent tutorials, or a camera that constantly obscures my view. If The Last Guardian is a misunderstood masterpiece, then that's its own fault. Don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for Ueda and his team, because now more than ever this industry needs games like The Last Guardian. Bold and innovative artistic endeavors that push boundaries on what big-budget video games are allowed to be. I've personally learned to let go of many preconceptions through this analysis, so despite all the blunders, I retain absolute faith that whatever Ueda cooks up next will be an amazing experience unlike anything else, a project that has now finally been teased. Team Ico/GenDesign have left an irrefutable mark on gaming history, and I look forward to seeing that monumental legacy continue.
That is one big